Yeah, I know I've ripped off karq like 5 times by now, but allow it, I'm sure he doesn't mind. Against D.Va, your gun basically does no damage due to the sheer amount of armor she has. She can also eat your torpedoes and explode you up close with her missiles. The obvious advice is to play distance and kite back from her boosters, but that's obvious and you don't need me to tell you that. Force D.Va to choose between multiple different options. For example, if you torpedo her backline while your tank goes in, she's forced to either mark you, which creates space for your tank, or she marks your tank, which gives you space to deal damage with your gun and potentially your torpedoes. Juno D.Va is also a great combo at top level play.
The D.Va goes through the hyper ring and goes flying into the backline. So if you're just playing like a Bap, Illari or Sigma type thing, the D.Va will just go flying past. Your Bap, Illari will put under serious pressure, especially on nano timings, and the Sigma can't do all that much about it.
Against Doomfist, he's one of your best matchups. Easily poke him from distance, and even when he goes in, you can avoid his seismic slam and his punch by just double jumping and maintaining your verticality with your gliders. Just make sure to pop torpedoes after he blocks so you don't feed him that punch. Of course, if a teammate needs healing, you can pop your torpedoes early. Against Queen, her thin hitbox makes hitting your shots decently hard. Not to mention, her ultimate basically fucks over your orbital ray, which is less so the case with something like Kitsune Rush. However, there's 2 clear advantages you have over Queen: verticality and open space. If you're perched up on high ground, she needs to hit the knife of her life to be able to do anything to you. And if you've got open space between yourself and the Queen, because she's got no shield like a Reinhardt, Ram or Sigma, you can punish her pretty easily when she walks. Against Mauga, you can use your orbital ray to help out your tank if they're stuck in Mauga's cage. Just make sure you're not stuck in it too. The previous advice about abusing high ground also applies for similar reasoning. Against Orisa, just ignore her. Likewise to D.Va, she also has insane armor, but she also has Fortify, and coupled with tanks giving 40% less ult charge, you're just tickling Orisa at that point. There's a lot more valuable stuff you could be doing, like supporting angle control or dueling squishies, which is all stuff you can learn in my Juno guides. Ram shouldn't be too much of a threat. You can easily kite his Nemesis form, especially when he's in Annihilation, by just turning around and using your Hyper Ring. Just be careful of being yoinked back into the ground against his Vortex. Against Ryan, while he does have a ton of armor, your shield break isn't abysmal. You can use it to soften him up from distance and to make his rotations harder. Barring that, there isn't too much to note playing against Ryan, except to keep distance and use high ground of course. However, I will say that Juno synergizes quite nicely with Ryan when it comes to inting in with Orbital Ray and Hyper Ring. Hog shouldn't be an issue. Your small hitbox, tons of movement, and his lack of armor actually make this a somewhat favourable matchup for you. Just be careful when you pop your gliders, because you can't move up or down, meaning that if you're in open space, you're basically a free kill. Against Sigma, the majority of the time, your team's win condition is going to be to overwhelm Sigma up close, or to skip past the Sigma and go straight onto his backline. Hyper Ring is instrumental in being able to do both of those things. The last thing is to time your torpedoes for when he pulls back his shield, otherwise a good Sigma is going to mark your angle and block them. Winston is actually not that annoying. If he jumps you, you can just easily escape and he can't do much about it except using his right click. However, the threat of Winston is less so himself and more so the rest of his team. If you're looking at Winston, you're not looking at the flanker beaming you down. Considering Winston also has a ton of armor that you basically deal no damage to, whenever you get dove, just keep a third eye on flankers to flush them out with your torpedoes and your gun. Against Ball, half the job is anticipating where he's coming from. Use your Hyper Ring first, then after he slams, pop your gliders to quickly dash out. Because he has no shield or matrix like Winston or D.Va, landing your torpedoes should be fairly easy as well. Zarya shouldn't be an issue hopefully. She has no armor, a decent hitbox, low mobility, and you just outrange her. Just make sure that when you pop Orbital Ray, she can counter-grab you and your team. Your teams are likely going to be clumped up to get value out of the Ray, and your Ray is going to move beyond the grab. Before I continue, check out my coaching, be sure to check it out in the top link in the description. Against Ashe, look for gaps in the mid-fight to duel or threaten her. If you're gonna do this, you need to keep 2 things in mind. Firstly, duel the Ashe after she's used dynamites. You haven't got a cleanse or self-heal on Juno. Ideally use your Hyper Ring instead of your gliders to close the distance, because you can then use your gliders afterwards to dodge and juke. If you follow these two things and your aim isn't horrendous, you should be fine. Against Bastion, don't bother shooting at him if he's in turret form with armor. However, out of turret form, he's a fairly easy dual target due to his massive hitbox. His ultimate is not that bad at zoning your orbital ray. It shouldn't be too much of an issue, but do keep it in mind. Cassidy will wreck you up close. If he lands the flash, you won't be able to use your gliders or your double jump, and it's a free kill for him. Instead, playing at distance, ideally on high grounds. His fall off starts at 20 meters, yours starts at 30, so if you're able to fight him at that 10 meter window, you're off to a good start. He'll also never be able to get use out of his flash. Against Echo, your torpedoes can be a great zoning tool to avoid her getting close, especially after she's used flights. The key is making sure that she doesn't land a lot of stickies on you, which can be done pretty easily by dashing out early. Against Genji, forcing his deflect from distance is pretty vital. If not, then he'll dash onto you, and if you pop your torpedoes, he's gonna deflect them. If you force his deflect at a distance, he'll either disengage and not dive you, or if he does dive you, he's basically feeding. Just pop your gliders, torpedoes, and he'll be low. As of the recent Season 12 patch, you are one of the few heroes that Hanzo can one-shot and two-shot body shots. With that being said though, I don't see it as being too big of an issue. If you're dueling him and he body shots you, play the cover and utilize the support passive with your shield HP to regen back the damage. I would also avoid using Orbital Ray in enclosed spaces because of how easy Dragon Strike can clear it. Likewise to Hanzo, you're also vulnerable to Junkrat's two-shot combo. However, practically speaking, this isn't an issue. You're way too mobile for Junkrat to comfortably get on top of. Just create as much distance from Junkrat as possible and punish him when he gets close. Against Mei, your big boon is your mobility. She's got more damage, sustain, utility and range than you, so don't just be sat behind your tank and heal bot because they're just gonna get walled off. Instead, swing wide on angles that Mei can't really match you on. If your tank is also getting frozen by Blizzard, pop your Hypering to help them out. Against Pharah, the worst thing you can do is to be static, or to have static positioning as some coaches like to call it. She basically makes no sound, so if she gets on top of you, it's wraps. Instead, move in accordance with where she's rotating. In this Lijiang example, if she's moving right to use the dojo as cover, rotate left side to create distance and make her dive more laborious. The only way Reba can get to you, if you're on high ground, is with his TP. And TP is on a long ass cooldown. This means that, in some cases, it's actually better to not retreat backwards, but forwards if there's another high ground. He literally can't reach you. The only time I wouldn't do this is if you're playing against a very mobile dive team, with heroes like Winston, Doomfist, Sombra, Tracer, Genji, Lucio, etc. Otherwise, you'll just get chased down and die. Against Sojourn, there's not too much to say here. If you go onto her, she'll slide away, and if she goes onto you, you just dash away. The key thing is de-peeking and kiting her overclock where possible, because unless they can't aim, I wouldn't challenge it. Soldier is actually easier to deal with than Sojourn. He has no verticality, his helix is easier to avoid than Railgun, and he's got a slightly nicer hitbox. Just de-peek when he pops his heal, so you can heal up yourself, and he should be easier to duel. Against Sombra, she can't touch you if you're on high grounds. Good Sombras aren't gonna waste their translocate to come and chase you unless you're already low, and even if she does, you should be fine to get out. However, the hack is the big issue. It can cancel not just your glide, but also your hypering, which actually shocked me a bit in testing. So what's the solution? Well, even though the hack cancels the glide, you still get that initial dash of momentum. If possible, position yourself to a nearby piece of cover so you get use out of that dash instead of playing out in the open. Symmetra's wall can be pretty annoying to deal with because every aspect of your kit that hasn't got to do with speed boost is blocked. However, your ultimate can be a good answer to a sim wall push, especially if your comp has a ton of cleave damage from things like Ryan Swings, Fire Strikes, Ram Pummels, all of which can help turn the tide against Symmetra. Torb is a non-issue. You can break his turret with ease, his Cheeto shots are hard to consistently land on your tiny mobile hitbox, and while his armor can be annoying to deal with, his decently sized hitbox means that this matchup should be okay. Tracer is one of your biggest issues as Juno. You haven't got insane verticality, you have no armor, and you have no self-heal or self-sustain. In my Juno guide, I went over this matchup in depth and gave a visual example, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. In short though, you want to take soft off angles to prevent the tracer from getting on top of you, create distance with your mobility, then get a quick lock on with your torpedoes. Venture is not an issue. Your tiny hitbox and movement basically outplay any of their abilities. And not to mention, your double jump is a pretty safe counter to the excavates. Just make sure they don't hit you when you're falling back down. Against Widowmaker, the key is leveraging your significantly better mobility. Take high grounds with short sightlines, and try avoiding her sightlines when you're attempting to get on top of her. Against Ana, if she pops nano on the enemy tank, it's vital to hyper-ring yourself and your team to kite the nano. Barring that, you can pressure Ana safely from decent distances, and as a duo, Juno Ana is very strong. It's actually the current meta on Circle Royale due to how strong D.Va is. Leading on to that, against Baptiste, the biggest counter to him at the moment is speeding directly onto him, which Juno D.Va can do pretty well. In terms of a direct 1v1, he's the better duelist obviously. He's got more damage, more sustain, and more HP, but you can still tickle him at distance, and if you're lucky, you can potentially land a kill. You are pretty much never gonna interact with Brig, and that's mainly because Brig is never gonna interact with you. The only issue she might pose is when she's holding close range, short sightlined angles that are hard for you to push into, in which case, widen the angle and play the rest of the map available to you. Against Illari, the goal in both team play and ranked is to overwhelm her angle, hypering yourself and your team to get closer to her, and force her to move away from her strong angles. You're also not bad at breaking up pylon safely. Against Juno, there honestly isn't much to say here. It's a lot more broader picture, push and pull, macro stuff, like surviving when they push with their hypering, and making sure you get value when you push back in with your own. Neither of you are realistically gonna duel each other in an actual game. Against Kiriko, it's actually fairly realistic that both of you will fight over the same angle. In cases like these, Kiriko in theory has the edge, with a buffed kunais, slim hitbox, and Suzu. However, there's two things you can do. Firstly, leverage your mobility to get to the angle faster than she can to get a head start. Secondly, just ask a teammate to come with you. If you're solo queuing, don't worry, just take and support the angle your DPS is taking. Against Weaver, do not let him sit at the back and heal. You can pressure him out a fair bit at distance, at least a lot more than what he can do to you. And importantly, you don't need to kill the Weaver. Just make sure his attention is diverted away from healing and is spent trying to shoot you. Against Lucio, if he's redditing, he should be fairly easy to kill or pressure out. And of course, if he's trying to rush your backline, speed them out. You're the only hero who can actually deal with his rushes because you're the only other hero, barring Lucio, with a speed boost. Mercy is, well, mercy. The only special tip is that your torpedoes are a somewhat reliable way of dealing damage to her and Valkyrie, but of course, nothing special against the hero specifically. The only thing I'd say is actually finding a way to hypering and dive whoever she's pocketing. Moira will destroy you in duels and is actually an underrated counter to Juno. Her sustain compared to yours is night and day. It's a somewhat similar tip to Kiriko, but if you're already on an angle and she fades onto you, just glide away and leave. If you've got someone already with you on the angle, then you can stay and outduel her. Zenyatta is a free pick into you, at least individually. Cleanses Discord and abuses Jupiter-sized hitbox. Both of you have incredibly low sustain, so that cancels out. And of course, if your tank is looking to crush the Zen, enable them with your hypering, which should be especially useful in maps like Junkertown. So that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to check out my complete Juno guide, and shout out Hey Girly Pop, Rizwood and Kosh for spending a few hours to help gather the clips. Until next time.